All right, Mr. Koble here, and today we're going to do a read aloud of this DBQ. It is Valley Forge, Would You Have Quit? So we're learning the American Revolution. Valley Forge is a really difficult time, and the question is, if you served then, would you have quit? And based off what proof, what evidence would you base your reasons off of? So depending on what year I give this, I may give only assign one of the documents, or maybe two. Some other years I've assigned all of them. So I'm going to do a read aloud of the full thing. And if it doesn't apply to your class, then cool. Give yourself a high five because no one else will. And you can just skip to the part that's relevant for you. Okay. So Valley Forge. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, George Washington commanded several thousand Patriot soldiers who spent the winter at Valley Forge, 18 miles outside of Philadelphia. It was not an easy time. This mini-Q asked the question, if you had been a soldier in Washington's army, would you have quit? So there's only 4 documents, which is really nice. We're going to get started. So here's the hook. Now, once again, some years I may give this, some years I may not. But the situation, your name is Levi Zent. Most people call you Uncle Levi. You're a prosperous, third-generation Pennsylvania Dutch farmer with foodstuffs to sell. So prosperous means you're wealthy. Third generation means that your grandfather was the first person to be born in the United States. So his family's been here for a while. In September, the British Army under William Howe occupied nearby Philadelphia and set up comfortable quarters for the winter. Last month, the American Continental Army under George Washington made its rough winter camp at Valley Forge, just a few miles west of your farm. You have recently become a Quaker and hate war, but business is business. Last week, you sent your nephews to both camps to get prices offered by the two armies. Your nephews returned with this price list. So here are the prices offered by the two camps, the American camp and the British camp. So this is how much they are willing to pay for your supplies that you are selling. So the Army of Valley Forge, the Patriot Army, they're willing to buy 1 pound of butter for 3 shillings. They're willing to buy a bushel of potatoes for 10 shillings. And they're willing to buy a pound of veal, which I believe is some kind of pork, for 1 shilling. So they're willing to spend this amount of money. The British, on the other hand, are willing to spend a lot more. They're willing to spend 7 shillings for butter. They're willing to spend 16 shillings for potatoes. They're willing to spend 4 shillings for veal. So they're willing to pay a lot more for the same supplies. So you're going to answer these following questions from the point of view of Uncle Levi. Which army are you going to sell your foodstuffs and why? So which army are you going to sell to? If most of your neighbors do the same as you, what impact will it have on the American Army at Valley Forge? So yeah, based on this chart of how much the armies are willing to pay you for your supplies, who would you rather sell to? Okay, so you can pause that, answer it as you wish, and when you're done, you can move on to background essay. Valley Forge, would you have quit? The first 2 years of the American Revolution had not gone well for the Continental Army. Since the summer of 1775, when he had taken command, George Washington and his troops had withdrawn from Boston and retreated from New York City. Most recently, in October 1777, he had been unable to stop the British when General Howe marched his army into the national capital of Philadelphia. True, there had been a victory at Trenton and was a success at Princeton, but on the whole, Washington's army had seen hard times. Not surprisingly, Washington was having some trouble keeping his soldiers in the army. Some of his men had signed on for 1 or 2 years. However, the most frequent time of enlistment was 9 months. 9-month men were going home and not returning. Others simply deserted. So what do you think deserted means based on this bold word? So based on the context clues. To make matters worse, Washington's own position was uncertain. Some members of Congress did not trust him. To them, the general from Virginia seemed to be leading a grand retreat. Like much of America, Philadelphia was divided over the war. Some Philadelphians even welcomed the British. A few young women developed scarlet fever. A fascination with British soldiers and their bright red coats. So a few Philadelphia women had the hots for the British. Anyway, Washington's own chief of engineers wrote that, quote, "There is 100 times more enthusiasm for this revolution in Paris than there is in the United States altogether." So he's saying like a good amount of Americans don't care. Like there's more excitement across the ocean in a different country about the war than there is inside the United States. With Howe's army of 18,000 comfortably quartered in Philadelphia, Washington decided to build a winter camp at Valley Forge, about 18 miles northwest of Philadelphia. It was not big enough to be called a village, with only a few fieldstone houses and a mill for forging iron. The Quaker farms in the area offered the promise of food for his men, and the camp would be close enough to Philadelphia to keep an eye on the British. It was the week before Christmas, 1777. The first job of the men was to build log, quote-unquote, huts. Each hut was 16 feet by 14 feet with a door at one end, a stick and clay fireplace at the other, and no windows. Each hut slept 12 men. There were no beds, just straw on the mud floor. Cold was one problem, smoke was another. The huts would be home for the next 6 months. So for 6 months, you have 12 dudes sleeping in a room that's like half the size of my classroom. Just putting that in perspective for you. Some of the conditions experienced by the soldiers at Valley Forge are revealed in the 4 documents that follow. Today, we know that most of the army survived the winter. We also know that on April 13th, 1778, word reached camp that the French would join the Americans in war. It was a huge turning point. But what we know today was not known in late January 1778. Victory seemed a long way off. In fact, for many, it seemed unlikely. Now it is time to look into your heart of hearts. Your 9-month enlistment is up on March 1st, just 1 month away. George Washington is desperate to keep his army intact. You miss your family and are concerned about your aging mother. Examine the documents that follow and answer the question: had you been a soldier at Valley Forge, would you have quit? So your circumstance is you survive Valley Forge, but you don't know that the French are joining you in the war. And the question is, are you going to re-enlist in the army after going through Valley Forge? Not are you going to desert, not are you going to, switch sides and pull a Benedict Arnold, join the British, but like, would you re-enlist or would you have let your 9-month term expire and not rejoin? So here are the background questions. Like I said, some years I'll have you guys do this, some years I have you won't. But in December of what year did Washington and his troops arrive in Valley Forge? So when does Valley Forge start? How many miles is Valley Forge from Philadelphia? Explain each of these terms in friendly words. So don't copy and paste off Google. There's nothing I hate more than that. You don't learn. Any dummy can copy and paste. But in your 8th grade words, explain each of these terms. What is the main idea of the quotation by Washington's chief of engineers? That quote is right here. There's 100 times more enthusiasm for this revolution in Paris than there is in the United States altogether. And then, did word of France's decision to join the Americans in the war come before your March 1st decision point or afterwards? And that would have a huge effect on if you would stay. Some interesting stuff related. 73 is the Boston Tea Party. 73 also have streetlights installed in Boston. Ayo, look at that. 76 is the Doi. 77, Army arrives in Valley Forge. 83 is the end of the war. In 1984, a 13-year-old makes the first balloon ride in America. So fun stuff. 86, America's first golf club in South Carolina. And 87, the writing of the Constitution. So two of these things are not like the other. But anyway. Now your buckets. So when you're like I said, some years I'll have you do this, some years I'll have you won't. But when you're doing your buckets, think about what topics would determine whether you stay in the war or not. So one of these buckets could be, stay in the war, one of these buckets could be not staying in the war. So if you're thinking already like, yo, there's no way I'm gonna re-enlist, then maybe like that's your main one. And then there's 3 different like sub buckets that would fit reasons for not staying in the war. So if your main bucket is not, you don't want to stay in the war because like you already know, like you're a quitter, then you maybe as you're reading, you think of, okay, now what are like the 3 reasons that I wouldn't stay in the war? And these are going to be our 3 paragraphs later on. If you're the opposite and you're a patriot and you fervently believe in things like freedom and self-government and all that, then you would be, yes, I will re-enlist, and then maybe 3 reasons why you would re-enlist. So once again, if this applies for your class, great. If it doesn't, too bad. Move on. All right, so here's Doc A. So whenever we look at the document, the first thing we look at is the source. So this is a whole bunch of varied sources, including all of these different books. This one's written in 1974, and then as well as researchers at a library at University of Michigan. So we know that this is not a primary source. This is a collection of data from very good people that know what they're doing. So credible source. All right. So the first thing I look at is the title. I see it is the estimates of illnesses and deaths at Valley Forge. The date is right here. So it's a 3-month stretch from December to February of 1777 to 1778. So you can see that the total amount of soldiers is they're estimated right here. You can see they start with 12,000 and they end with 8,000. For those of you that are not good at math, that means a third of soldiers either died or deserted. So that's a lot. The next one is illness estimates during encampment. So people that, quote, reported sick or unable to report for duty. In December, it was almost 3,000. And in February, it was almost 4,000. So that is a lot of people that are estimating to be sick. Now, if we look at the math, we can see that, it's almost 3,000. We'll round up to 3,000. So if you have 3,000 people out of 12,000 say that they are sick, that means that is a fourth of soldiers saying, hey, we are very sick, we cannot report to duty. So about 1/4 of soldiers are sick in December of 1777. In February of 1778, you have almost 4,000 soldiers report sick, but that's out of 8,000. So 4,000 soldiers out of 8,000 total are reporting sick, and that means that half of them are sick. So 1/4 were sick in December, 1/2 of them are sick in February. That is a lot. And the death estimate due to illness is between 1,800 to 2,500. So you can probably average that out at around 2,100. So that would be, this is your raw data. You're gonna have to math it up a little bit. So in terms of analysis, is this a primary or secondary source? So remember our sourcing at the top, who's this written by? Is this written at the time of the event or is it written later on? On February, how many soldiers at Valley Forge were sick? What percentage was this? Oh man, I just did that for y'all. Unbelievable. What was the low estimate of the number of American soldiers who died at Valley Forge? How could this argument be used for quitting? How could it be used against quitting? So you maybe have to think a little bit outside the box for some of this. Obviously, the quitting one's kind of easy. You're like, yo, that's a good percentage of me dying. But as far as percentage against quitting, maybe if you really believe in the war, you're like, wow, my country really needs me to fight if I am healthy enough to fight. So some different ideas. All right. So you can pause here if you need to. And I'm going to go on document B. All right, document B. So the source is an engraving of a painting by William Henry Powell. And this is the title of it, Committee of Congress at Valley Forge, National Archives, 1866. Okay, first thing I notice is 1866. And it says that this dude lived from 1823 to 1879. So this painting is done almost 80 years later than Valley Forge, because we know Valley Forge is in like 1778, and this painting is made in 1886. So this is not, I know it's in the past, but this is not a primary source. It'd be a secondary source because this painting is not made by someone that was right there. It's made 80 years later. This is like if we made a painting today of D-Day or World War II or something like that. So this is not a primary source. You can see you have George Washington presenting congressional committee to soldiers at Valley Forge. The committee of live congressmen stayed several weeks and was helpful in getting more food and more clothing to the soldiers. So so it looks like you have George Washington. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Oh, it's the morning. You have George Washington in the middle, and then it looks like on the left you have these healthy, warm, comfortable committee congressmen that George is presenting, which George is presenting the poor, cold, sick, almost dead soldiers that he currently has. And you can see in the expression on his face is like, yo, y'all see this? Like, y'all see what I have to work with? And you won't give me more food and you won't give me more supplies, but you're seeing what I have here, right? Like he's kind of showing them what's up in the efforts of getting more food and clothing. So go ahead and take care of the questions. Pause it if you need to, and then I'm going to document C. All right, document C. So let's take a look at the source. So this is the diary of, oh God, what's this dude's name? Albigence. Who names their kid Albigence? What kind of weirdo is this? Okay, whatever. His last name is Waldo. Oh my God. This is the weirdest dude ever. Whatever. Diary of, Albania Waldo, a Connecticut surgeon, 1777. Okay, so written in 1777. So this is written at the time of Valley Forge. Note, Dr. Waldo suffered during his winter at Valley Forge, but stayed loyal to the Continental Army as he helped other surgeons to care for sick soldiers. Cool. So this dude is in Valley Forge. He is writing about Valley Forge while he is in Valley Forge. All right, December 14, 1777. The army, which has been surprisingly healthy hitherto, now begins to grow sickly from the continued fatigues they have suffered this campaign. So, quick note, when you're reading historical stuff, they talk in really long sentences where they say nothing. So, like, you can circle the words. You can cross out the words that don't mean anything, like hitherto. And then you can circle the one, like the keywords that you really need to know, like fatigues and sickly. Like, you can get the main idea from like 40% of the words in the sentence. Just giving you a heads up. So yet they show, okay, so they're very sick for a while. Yet they still show a spirit of alacrity, cheerful willingness, and contentment not to be expected from so young troops. Cool. So yes, they're really sick. Yes, they've suffered a lot, but they're still chill. They're still happy. They're still like optimistic. I am sick, discontented, and out of humor. So he's tired of it. He's not happy right now. Poor food, hard lodging, cold weather, fatigue, nasty clothes, nasty cookery, vomit half my time, smoked out my senses, the devilment, I can't endure it. Why are we sent here to starve and freeze? There comes a soldier. His bare feet are seen through his worn-out shoes, his legs nearly naked from the tattered remains of an only pair of stockings. Cool. Things are not good. Now let's go to 1 week later. Heartily wish myself at home. My skin and eyes are almost spoiled with continual smoke. This dude's getting smoked out because they don't have any windows in their cabins and there's constantly a fire running so they don't freeze to death. A general cry through the camp this evening among the soldiers. No meat, no meat. The distant vales echoed back the melancholy sound. No meat, no meat. Okay, like this part, useless. This part's the main idea. Okay. So, do you believe this document is accurate? Is an accurate picture of camp at Valley Forge? Why or why not? 2, which hardship described by Waldo most gets your attention? 3, make one inference about the quality of ventilation in the soldiers' huts. So what does his diary tell you about what it's like to actually sleep and live in the huts? How could it be used for quitting? How could it be used against quitting? All right, you can pause that if you need to, and then here's document D. So this one is written by Thomas Paine, and it's called The American Crisis, once again written 1776, so during Valley Forge. The first thing we need to think about before we start this reading is we need to think about this author, Thomas Paine. Now, if you have been paying attention at all, you remember, oh, Thomas Paine. Oh, he wrote that common sense thing, the thing that convinced everyone to convince a lot of people to be patriots. So Thomas Paine is a patriot. I know that. Okay, so Thomas Paine, a very patriot writer, is writing this. Okay. Now, note, General Washington had essays from, quote, The American Crisis, read out loud to his soldiers at Valley Forge. Paine, known by some as the author of the Revolution, took no payment for this historic publication. Cool. So George Washington, in an effort to hype up his men and keep their spirits up, would have passages from Thomas Paine's book read out loud to his soldiers. So you know that this is to pump them up. This is to keep them happy. This is going to be pro-patriot because it's written by Thomas Paine. Whenever you have historical readings like this, you can infer what 75% of it is going to say just based off who it's written by and what year it is. So this what the source is. So this, we know it's Thomas Paine, we know it's pro-patriot, we know it's meant to hype up his soldiers, and we know that it's during the Revolutionary War, during Valley Forge. So we know basically that this is going to be pro-patriot. All right, so here we go. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. Okay, let's just stop right there. So the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot. This is the same thing as like calling someone a fair weather fan. Like when their team's doing really good, then they're a fan of that team. So Padres just got good this year, so I'll use them as an example. If I've been a Padres fan for a very long time when they've been very bad, and I've stayed loyal as a good fan. But a lot of people, now that the Padres are good, are like, ooh, I'm now a Padres fan. Now I'm into them. I like that Manny Machado guy. So those people that only will be fans of a team when they're good would be summer soldiers or sunshine patriot or sunshine fans. So only when things are good are they going to be a soldier. Only when things are good are they going to be a patriot. So he's saying the summer soldier and sunshine patriot, so people that will only serve and stand as patriots when things are good, will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country. So they're going to shy away. They're going to cower. They're going to back off. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and women. So the soldiers currently going through Valley Forge, through all the hardship, deserve the love and praise and yada, yada, yada. Okay, so that's the first part. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Cool. So the harder something is to do, the more satisfying it is when you win. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is the dearness only that gives everything its value. Cool. So this is basically saying, like nothing good is ever easy. Nothing worth doing is ever easy. So he's saying like the harder something is, the harder the conflict, the more reward you're going to get out of it, the more glorious the triumph. This is like when you play a game on hard mode, it's so much more satisfying to beat than when you play a game on easy mode because it's that much harder, it's that much more difficult. So you feel so much better when you finally beat it. That's basically the comparison. Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. And if being bound in that matter is not slavery, then there is not such a thing as slavery upon earth. Okay, we're going to ignore that last part because that's going to confuse all of you. But basically what he's saying is Britain basically has declared that Britain has a right to do anything Britain wants, no matter in any case whatsoever. And Thomas Paine is comparing that to slavery, which not exactly the same severity at all in any way. Definitely an exaggeration, considering that if you go 1,000 miles south, you have actual slavery. But once again, that is what he's saying to hype up the Patriots. Cool. So here are your questions. Feel free to rewind to any part of that. If there's anything, this is probably the hardest source of the whole thing. If there's anything I hope you get out of reading these sources, it's that take it slow, one sentence at a time, one half sentence at a time, really dissect what they're saying because sometimes it's pretty rough. Okay. All right, go ahead and answer these questions and pause it and then go to the next one. Cool. So by now, we should have one of our main thoughts. We should have, do we quit or do we stay? So March 1st, we survive Valley Forge, you have a choice to make. Do you stay for another 9 months or do you say, no, I'm going home? So do you stay or do you go home? That's the first choice you got to make. If you stay, then you have to think of 3 different reasons that you have stayed. So maybe one of our buckets or reasons is it's the Patriot Army, the Continental Army really needs soldiers, really needs healthy men that are able to fight. So that might be one reason that you might stay is like, oh, they really need me. I'm really valuable to them. Maybe another reason you want to stay is because you really hate Britain. You think Britain is absolutely terrible. You want to fight for freedom and self-democracy and all that. That might be another reason. A third reason, you can think of it on your own with your group. Now, that's if you want to stay and re-enlist. If you want to quit and be a quitter and go home, then you have to think of 3 reasons that you'd want to go home. So one of them, obviously how terrible Valley Forge is. One of them, how poor the Continental Army is. And you think of the third reason. Cool. So below you have your chicken foot. Once again, some classes may do this, some classes may not. But your thesis would be, I'm deciding to stay, or I'm deciding to quit and go home because blank. And your 3 reasons that you have go first reason goes here, second reason goes here, third reason goes here. Cool. This is your outline. I'm probably going to have you do this differently because I'm not a huge fan of this one, the way they did this. And then I'd probably have you type it. And that's it. There you go. That's Valley Forge. Cool. All right. Go Padres.